we called our conference where there will be projects, where there will be funds, and we are doing it together with our long-term partners, German Economic Center.
Housekeeping for those of you who are now listening to the original audio and would like to switch to English, you can do that in the panel below and choose the simultaneous translation to English. Для тих же, хто продовжуватиме слухати нас українською, ви можете залишатися на оригінальному.
Those of you who want to stay in Ukrainian, you can turn to Ukrainian or turn to English if you want to listen to English. First of all, we present the overview of the Center of Economic Strategy and the overview of our analytics to show you the details that have happened in the economy, that have happened throughout the last month. Then we'll go to the London conference, and we will also talk to Hlib Vyshlinsky, who has been to London, as well as our beautiful analysts. I will present them to you a little bit later. So before we start, one more technical issue. We will ask you now to go through a survey. On your screens, you will see some questions on your screen. We would like to ask you to reply. This will help us to better plan events for a more convenient time for you. Once you give us the answers, this icon will disappear. Actually, it doesn't. Okay, yes. So now let me ask Gary Polushkin from German economic team. Mr. Polushkin is doing for many years Ukraine, and very happy to see Mr. Gary.
Thank you very much. Warm welcome from Berlin. It's a great pleasure for me as project manager for Ukraine of the German economic team to introduce today's webinar organized by the German economic team and the Center for Economic Strategy. The German economic team is an economic policy advisory project financed by the German Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action and has been active in advising the Ukrainian government for more than 15 years. And today's webinar is a monthly event that we jointly organize with the Center for Economic Strategy. It provides an important opportunity to discuss regular updates on Ukraine's economic situation and current relevant topics. Today's one, the results of the London conference for Ukraine's recovery. While the focus must be kept on the current war effort, it's also the time to discuss proposals for Ukraine's reconstruction, to have one comprehensive plan ready for the time when the war ends. Russia's full-scale invasion has been causing catastrophic suffering and direct and indirect costs and damages for Ukraine's economy and infrastructure. In a joint publication, the World Bank, the EU Commission, and the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine estimate that by February 2023, the reconstruction costs amount of around $411 billion, but this estimate doesn't even take into account the occupied territories. So the costs increase by every day of war. In this context, the London conference took place at the right time. I look forward to today's discussion of the results of the conference, and particularly, I'm very interested in hearing implications for financing this immense reconstruction effort, the transparency of procurement, the usage of Russian frozen assets, the role of investment guarantees, and the private sector's role for Ukraine. I'm very delighted that the Center for Economic Strategy has invited such high-level policymakers and experts, Ms. Deputy Minister Zykova for Finance, Ms. Deputy Minister Azarkhina for Infrastructure Development, Mr. Kleine-Brockhoff, Mr. Kirchner, and I'm giving back the floor to Maria and Hlib, who will host today's event. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Gary, for such a great intro, and let's come back to the overview of the economics. Dmytro Gorinov will start, the senior economist of the economic strategy. Good afternoon, colleagues. Do you hear me well? One moment. Let me open up the presentation. So let's start with the military update. We have seen that Armed Forces of Ukraine is doing great job in the east, but also we see some dynamics also in the south. Out of the military ideas, there is some risk of blowing up the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, but today Mr. Budanov said that due to some steps, some public and non-public steps that the Ukrainian authorities have exercised, this risk has decreased. Also, several weeks ago, there was a short-lived mutiny by Wagner Group, a terrorist organization. We didn't really understand what exactly that was. We really counted that they would bring to something more significant, but unfortunately, nothing really significant happened. And of course, the Russian troops did lose some war equipment that's already some use. Regarding the macroeconomic trends, finally, we have received the final data from the latest GDP. The decrease was actually lower than expected, and whatever was preliminary estimated, now it's actually 10.5 compared to 13.5. And if we compare it back to the fourth quarter, we see some increase. So some institutions, Ukrainian, international, they continue to improve their yearly forecasts, and they say that there could be the 3% improvement. Some institutions also wanted to increase their forecasts, but they changed their mind. But the possible increase of GDP through improving of economy, it's of course compensated by the blowing up of the Kakhovka hydropower station and certain aftermath that is going through all the industries that are involved. I will talk more about it in detail. The business confidence is improving. People are being optimistic. Most sectors are optimistic. The index of more than 50% means that there are many more optimists than pessimists. This is already happening for 3 months. All these sectoral indices are also above neutral level, except for services. Industry and constructions improved expectations, while services kept the previous level and even shortly decreased. Nevertheless, they are still above 50. The biggest dynamics was shown by construction, and this index is the best compared to other sectors, and it's actually the best historically during the last 1.5 years. That means that they really expect some investment in reconstruction. At the same time, the estimates regarding the war damages increased, not that much, but this is the data for May, so they were just finalized. They still don't contain the calculations that took place after the blowing up of the Kakhovska reservoir, because it was evaluated at $2 billion. That is comprised of also residential housing, the Kakhovska power station itself, and infrastructure. We have also finalized the methodology, and we have also some good news regarding National Bank. They downgraded credit risk forecast by 10% points back to 20%. That was actually last year. If in December this was expected that some 30% of the corporate portfolio would default, now they're going back to 20%. That means that $2 billion less losses expected for banks. Let's go sector by sector now. In energy, as we already said before, this blowing up, this mining of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, that means that Ukraine may lose 6,000 megawatts of installed capacity. That's the biggest nuclear power station in Ukraine, and I think in Europe, and probably one of the biggest in the world. At the same time, the energy experts continue calculations, the aftermath of the blowing up of the Kakhovska power station. We can see that electricity has really decreased because of flooding, and because of this there also has been a bad effect on the renewable capacity. It was down by 500 megawatts as a result of this terroristic attack. Apart from that, through certain in the summer, because of some heat, because of the increase of consumption of electricity, so we didn't have any exports during the last months, and import has increased. And in certain days, that meant that in Ukraine was the cost of electricity higher than in the neighboring countries. Also, there were some more attacks on the energy objects, not in the scale that we had last autumn, and we don't understand whether this is like a systematic character or is it ad hoc. But nevertheless, I fixed quite a significant number of additional messages about attacks on energy infrastructure. Let me also remind you that starting from the 1st of July, we have returned the full-scale taxation of fuels, implying 12 to 24 growth of retail price. That concerns the gas, the diesel, and the gasoline. This will lead to growth of retail prices, 20% for gas, 16% for diesel, and 24% for gasoline. That's all going to add up to the index of consumer prices. So this may mean like 0.75 increase, or maybe a few more percent through some indirect services. Metals, until the Kakhovska, the production grew. In May also there was a good improvement. Unfortunately, in June, that was marred with the Kakhovska hydropower station destruction, and because of the lack of water for some technical needs, they had to use some drinkable water. The biggest metallurgical company of Ukraine, Azarkhina, they said that they had to decrease twice versus last month. In Metinvest, they just mentioned that everything is under control, but we don't see any figures. Again, these are some indirect losses of the biggest size through metallurgy, but it will definitely increase the level of losses because of the business that was flooded around the Kakhovska power station. In agriculture, unfortunately, we still continue to have the problem with the grain corridor. It's not working to full capacity, and there are many more forecasts that it's very unlikely that they will extend it. Exactly in July, this could be the end of this initiative, and there are some pessimistic forecasts regarding its continuation. And of course, when we hear the neighboring countries who say that they would like to continue to import certain agricultural produce from Ukraine, that doesn't sound really helpful. So these countries already mentioned that they want to actually expand the terms and the list of products for ban. Once again, this is not okay. And the Ukrainian agrarian associations suggest taking this discussion to the World Trade Organization, because this may even violate certain agreements of the international level regarding free trade. Also, harvesting campaign has started, and the government actually and the agrarian associations have really actually improved their harvest expectations. the demining of the territory continues. 25% of the short-listed plots, which were mentioned as priority plots, they were already demined. More agro companies announced that they will continue to develop further into processing, because this will allow to go over these limitations for the experts. And secondly, this is less risks regarding logistics, because the value of the product will be more and more added value. So it will be less logistical expenses. Thank you for the attention. I guess that's all from my side. Many thanks, Dmitro. I would suggest Maria to take the floor. She will talk about the humanitarian policy, and then we'll talk about the fiscal sector. And let me remind you that we have the translation.
Colleagues, we have simultaneous interpretation, so please try not to hurry. And now, Maria, the floor is yours. Hello, and I hope that you can see and hear me. Let us proceed speaking about the monetary and foreign exchange policy of Ukraine. Let's speak about the key rates. At the latest session, the board of the NBU made the decision to keep the key policy rate unchanged at the level of 25% to maintain hryvnia instruments appeal and to sustain FX market stability and reduce inflation. It is expected that in July or September this year, the rate will go down several points, and that will result in better expectations, and we will have sufficient level of international reserves. The yield of 1 year hryvnia military bonds decreased to 18.2. At the end of May, average rates on retail deposits continued to rise slowly, and interest rate on 12 months retail deposits rose to 15.2%, and rates on 3 months deposits increased to 13.8. Inflation rate has been declining, and currently it is 15.3%, but actual increase in prices is a bit slower than as expected by the NBU, as they indicated in the official report in April this year. Speaking about inflation rate, the decline in inflation is due to ample food and fuel supply, and also stronger positions of hryvnia in the cash market and improved inflation and exchange rate expectations. And core inflation also decreases, also explained by the base effect. So core inflation decreased to 15.6%, and while the growth in administered prices slowed to 9.3% year to year, and also the moderate demand and positive exchange rate expectations also played an important role. And
що пояснюється помірним попитом та поліпшенням курсових очікувань на тлі ефекту бази агроінвестицій. Не менш вагому роль і відіграв мораторій на підвищення тарифів на житлово-комунальні послуги для населення. Очікується, що стабільна інфляція буде спостерігатися і надалі,
mostly due to reduced base effect, but it will happen slower, reintroduction of pre-war fuel taxes, and electricity market price adjustments. And also the temporary impact on the inflation rate will be due to the terrorist attack of the Russian Federation on Kakhovka HPP, and it will contribute about 0.3% to the annual inflation rate. Speaking about the banking sector of Ukraine, we observe further increase in volumes of household deposits, mostly due to a higher interest rate for hryvnia than for other currencies, but it is expected that it will the growth of these deposits will slow down, foreign deposits, foreign currency deposits on demand and term ones continue to decline due to hryvnia state strengthening and allocation of funds into hryvnia deposits. And also because of higher deposit rates, this kind of deposits become more attractive than foreign currency ones. Loans continue to decrease. Volumes of new lending don't cover repayments of earlier loans due to weak demand for them. And the main driver for lending is the affordable loans 579 program. The key recipients are agriculture and wholesale enterprises. And also under this program, the loans is 1/3 of the net hryvnia corporate loan portfolio. Banks continue to recognize loan losses, and currently NPLs are at the level of 39.1%. And I will stop here and I pass over. Let's speak now about the fiscal part. Yuri. Are you there? Yes, waiting for my presentation to be uploaded. Okay, let me proceed with the presentation. You can see that in June, tax revenues to the budget continued increasing. If we consider them as net without the income tax that is paid on the quarterly basis, we will see that without the tax contributions month to month increased by 3% and by 59% year to year. And of course, there was the effect of low base due to import tax reliefs. Then this is the last month when the base comparison base is low, and then the comparison will be relevant. Import VAT was the largest revenue source, tax revenue source and engine of growth. It generated 28.7 billion hryvnias out of 79.5 billion of tax revenues. And domestic VAT plus foreign VAT generate 58% of total tax revenues, and this is the key source of revenues. And also the tax service and customs service this month reported that they exceeded their monthly revenue plan by 2.6 billion in total. Here it is hard to say whether it is about efficient administration, whether this is due to revival of the economy, that the economy is recovering better than as forecasted, but anyway, that's a positive thing. Now, if we consider details regarding sources of revenues for the consolidated budget, which unfortunately is only available for the period until April. For the first May, for the first 5 months, we see that grants remain the largest source of revenue for the consolidated budget, and this is the money that goes almost completely to the state budget. PAT is the largest source of revenues for local budgets, and if we compare that with the situation in 2022, with the entire year, we see that domestic VAT contribution decreases because previously it was number 4 immediately after imports VAT. Now it is number 6 because currently the NBU profit exceeded this indicator, and the distribution between imports and domestic VAT is improving, is tilting towards imports, and this is not the best sign, but we will follow the dynamics in the next months. Speaking about expenditures, we see a significant increase in expenses, budget expenses in May, and the main engines there were, well, the monthly expenses in May were second largest after December last year, and the greatest engines there, there's defense expenses. Obviously, over the 5 months of this year, they amounted to 745 billion hryvnias, which is 56% of total expenses. And that includes most, you could add the expenditures for law enforcement and justice system, and that will be more than 2/3 of the budget. But we also see that in May, there was a sharp increase in spendings on governance, general governance functions, and this is mostly about servicing the debt. Out of this 50 billion, 45.6 billion was spent on debt servicing. Now, speaking about foreign financing, in June, Ukraine received $1.6 billion. That's equivalent from the EU, and grant funding $1.2 billion from the US. We also had another tranche from IMF, another disbursement and another revenue from the World Bank, and the grant of 15 million from Finland. All in all, in first 6 months of 2023, the need for funding budget deficit, including debt repayment needs, amounted to more than $27 billion, while foreign financing from our partners as grants and loans amounted to 23.7 billion. And thus, we already have this anniversary, first 6 months without monetary financing. Serhiy Manchenko, the Minister of Finance, insists on that Ukraine's budget needs in 2023 will be fully covered, and thus it is possible to expect that further on the Ministry of Finance will not need to resort to monetary financing during the year, even though we see that due to significant increase in expenses in May and June, we have a significant deficit that in the last 2 months was not covered with external revenues, but we still have there some reserves from the previous months. That's it. Thank you. Thank you for your review, and thanks to CS colleagues for that you are following the trends and that you share this information with everyone who's interested in the situation in Ukraine. And let's proceed with the special theme of today's event, London conference results. And to start, I pass the floor to CEO of CES, Hlib Vyshlinsky. He went there, he was a witness to what was going on there. So the floor is yours now. Thank you. Colleagues, can you see my presentation now? Yes, we can see. Yes, now that's okay. Thank you. I will also cover the slides, and I would like to start by suggesting the short overview of the key news of Ukraine Recovery Conference that was held in London on the 21st, 22nd of June. That's an annual conference, which before 2021 was Ukraine Reform Conference. Now it is about recovery. And the main comparisons that were suggested were with the previous Ukraine Recovery Conference that was organized by Switzerland in Lugano. The next conference will be held in Germany. And Germany has already announced the plan to host the next conference. And now we believe we are thinking about this conditional path from London to Berlin. And the comparisons are for the benefits of London results, outcomes. And let me now cover the general situation that we now have, and that was revised based on the results of that were announced during the conference or on the eve of that. It's known that as of the 20th of June, budget needs of 2023 for Ukraine, this is where Yuri stopped the need to finance the budget deficit during the war. This needs will be covered. Now this is about 42, 43 billion dollars of funding that Ukraine expects, according to donors' commitments. That's a significant amount, which is 1/3 more than last year. That was 32 billion. But these obligations have already been, our partners have committed to those. But the problem is that starting in 2024 and beyond, we don't have that certainty. As of the 20th of June, we did not have a single firm commitment regarding the funding. In second half of the day on the 20th, there was an official press release of the European Commission that Ukraine will have access. Maria, how do we refer to that? This is facility, Ukrainian facility. That's the suggestion. Right. So that Ukraine will have access to this facility, and the special reform program will be developed to as a precondition to access it. And there are some news there. Good news are that the European Commission has committed to the budget period for from 2024 to 2027, 50 billion euros that will consist of grants and loans, and that will cover 45% of the estimated needs estimated by the EU needs to finance the budget deficit, the need for budget financing, because this is about the budget deficit and about expectations regarding serving the debt, and also needs for fast recovery. And actually what was interesting, it was clearly stated that this is 45%, meaning that the European Commission in this way transferred passed the ball to other partners. And several days ago, on Tuesday in Financial Times, there was an article based on the interview with the Minister of Finance of Ukraine, Serhiy Marchenko, where it was stated that we are very grateful to the European Union and the European Commission for the clear commitments, but what about the rest? And now the greatest expectations, where there was no additional information, that's expectation of funding from the US. This is about budget funding for the financial year from the US that starts on the 1st of October 2024, and it will cover a longer period, because actually only 45% covered. And I believe that Ms. Zykova from the Ministry of Finance will provide us with more detailed information regarding the situation with other partners, because not only these two actors have undertaken the commitments regarding the budget support of Ukraine. With other partners, we also work on that. And of course, that's also about the IMF program that has been planned, but that, in contrast to previous experience of Ukraine, it constitutes only a small portion of covering that huge deficit. Now it is expected to be 26% of GDP, and this is huge. Unfortunately, even after the meeting in London, the situation is still unclear regarding fast recovery this year, and the World Bank estimated the need as $14 billion. And on the eve of the conference, less than half of this amount was covered, around one half. During the conference, additional commitments were announced by the US, but all in all needs of Ukraine were not covered, and maybe Olga has some additional information. And unfortunately, after the conference, we do not have full commitments, full coverage of these needs. It is much better than in Lugana, where they didn't promise any funding actually for fast recovery, even though it was summer back then, which is the best season for construction work. So there is progress, but it is insufficient. And again, there is this gap between the official assessment. Last year, we spoke about valuation of the project submitted to Lugana by Ukraine to $800 billion. And now there's the World Bank estimated the damage and losses for $400 billion, and nothing that would amount to even dozens of billions of dollars. We don't see that, and we don't see the plans to offer these funds. However, what we heard was a very important speech statement by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and she promised to come up with the proposal to use the proceeds on the frozen Russian assets. It may amount to about 3 billion euros a year, but the discussion is ongoing. And actually, we need to keep in mind that here, if we consider legal details, just as in many other issues, we see some ethical doubts or problems for the democratic world, because on the one hand, our partners, they say that we cannot violate basic legal principles. We cannot just confiscate assets. We are not like Russia. We follow the rules. But on the other hand, Russia was the first one to break the rules. And thus, friends of Ukraine, among international partners as well, they say that one party doesn't follow the rules, and while all the other stakeholders follow the rules, and that means that bad actors will understand that not following the rules, destroying property and assets and killing people in other countries, it does not result in any military backlash or even financial backlash, so nobody will make you pay, even if the money is frozen, and that's a bad signal. But you can see on the slide that all in all, there's assets, Russian assets that are frozen in the EU. If they were now used to recover Ukraine, the amount would be more or less comparable, and that would give significant impetus to the Ukrainian economy and would help a lot of refugees come back home, because that would create huge demand for labor, human resources, and the salaries would be attractive for many.
And this would also give some additional taxation revenues that could really help fight against the aggressor. Also, what was important is the news related to war risks. At least 5 countries declared in their official statements about the decision on contributions to support the war risk insurance for Ukraine. And this is very important because the topic started to be raised some 1 year ago. Now it's very clear that there are players who are ready to make such insurances. One of the players is MIGA from World Banks, which is not enough capitalized to have the coverage for all types of risks. Development Finance Corporation of the US plans to cooperate with MIGA on insuring Ukrainian risks and reinsuring MIGA, as well as one of the big reinsurers, Marsh Lenin also declared that they are ready to work with the Ukrainian government. So the declarations of these 5 countries are also important to guarantee, to reinsure projects which are coming from the investors of various countries, as well as for the investment in some international mechanisms. And also very important that EBRD is also switching on if others are ensuring investment. EBRD is focusing on ensuring trade of import and export operations with Ukraine. They will work with private creditors to help with insurance risks from war. So slowly and slowly we are shaping, same as what I already said before, the financing of the deficit of budget and financing of recovery, where first of all we are talking about the financing that the Ukrainian authorities, both national and local, so we're talking about some mechanisms that will allow to engage some investment for the recovery, both by the internal and external investors. And the last important that was already presented as one of the biggest products, that's a system called DREAM. That's the electronic system to make the accountable management of the restoration. So several players are working here regarding the mechanisms of public access to it, to information about, to make it open data. It really much creates transparency, better management for the restoration, to avoid the double financing. It also helps to understand donors, which needs are there, and it actually sets up a certain order for the Ukrainian authorities who have not worked with such scale to make sure they make it a little bit more effective. So the system is so far launched in the pilot mode. Full-fledged, it will be operational in the end of this year. Many thanks. Coming back to you, Masha, for the further discussion. Thank you, Maria. You have mentioned all the aspects about the conference, but I really hope that our panelists will be actually something to add to it. First of all, let me present to you the panel. I think we have all the potential to cover all the aspects. We have invited two beautiful ladies, Deputy Minister of the Development of Hromadas. Olga is the Deputy Minister of Finances, and together with us from our Western partners is Robert Kirchner. He is the Deputy Manager of the German Economic Team. We have also asked Thomas, the Vice President and the Executive Director of German Marshall Fund, who is also working a lot for Ukraine, for the restoration of Ukraine. Unfortunately, he could not join us today, but he opened up the video, he recorded the video for us. So let me start from questions to Oleksandra. Before I started, please also don't forget to write questions to our panelists or to analysts or to the video that you will see. And please, our communications director will send everything to me to WhatsApp, and all of these questions after the panelists talk, we can announce these questions and we can discuss them. So, Oleksandr. Let's start from the other speakers. I apologize. Slava already wrote to me that she already came. Olga, do we have Olga Zykova? I think she was with us. Yeah, I see also the announcement from Oleksandr that she has joined. It's also your decision who you will give the floor. If Oleksandr has joined us, let's once again recheck whether Oleksandra is with us. Yes, Oleksandr has joined us. Good. Then let's start with Oleksandr. I would like to ask 3 questions. something that has already been mentioned by my colleague, and one question from me. So what Hlib talked about, he talked about insurance of war risks. This is very important for the private sector. And the first question to Oleksandra will exactly be how the private sector will take part in the restoration of Ukraine. Have you discussed this? Do you have already initiatives from the investor side, or somebody from the private companies is interested and wants to invest their funds into the Ukrainian recovery? I'm ready to answer then. Maria, please mute yourself, because no, it's better. Many thanks for joining you to this conversation, and many thanks for this question, because really for us, the London conference in our team, we felt it like an exam. It's like the summer in the end of the academic year. It's like after Lugano, we were preparing ourselves. Of course, for Lugano, we all understood we were not fully prepared. But it's good that this event did take place and we had some vision, but the whole last year we were preparing answers to questions which we heard from partners. The first question was, does Ukraine really understand what is the priority for them? The second question, is Ukraine capable of creating a system in which the corruption risks will be taken care of, that the money for recovery will not be stolen? And the third question referred to more pragmatic interests of various countries who are the partners, who try to understand whether they will have enough space in the business to become the member of the Ukrainian recovery, because all the businesses reacted to political declarations about promised billions and billions for Ukraine, and of course they wanted to become this part of this new market. Yes, the new market is not yet composed, and the Ministry of Finances will also support that. The main funds that we have, it's actually the restructured loans. We are just entering this point when we try to get some donors' funds and some private investment. So our general vision, we understand that all the funds which are necessary for recovery, they're so huge, then we always have to raise the question that Russia has to pay. Before the Russia has not paid, we evidently have to count on our partners, but also to count on private business, because the money that we would need without the engagement of private investment, it will be very difficult. So we were preparing answers to questions about the priorities. The priorities, first of all, we tried to formulate from the point of view, not of some big vision of the development of Ukraine, but also from the more adaptive instrument, which, first of all, fixes the principles of prioritization. That's why we have initiated and developed the methodology for prioritization. We first launched it together with experts, then we are finalizing it, fine-tuning together with experts from the World Bank. That's like a formula approach on the basis of the methodology that is already available in the World Bank in other countries, and that helps us at least to evaluate from all the project ideas that we are getting from communities, from sectoral ministries, to the extent that they are really needed. It's like a data-driven approach that the politicians database are using, and we're very much happy that we have started to do it. We have the digital system to evaluate that, but that, again, that's never enough, because we would also need to work with some program strategic documents. So how we have solved this question? From the one side, we have taken the necessity to analyze objects using certain formula and analyze them and know the values of each of them to restore this or that object. And the second approach we have taken for the projects that pertain to communities and regions, the necessity for their synchronization to fit the developed programs. That's something that is being developed by communities themselves, so they are identifying themselves, and we, in such a way, we have to cross-check whether their strategic vision actually coincides with what is on the paper in their project applications. The second direction, we're just starting with IFC and the World Bank to make sure we would also get some sectoral prioritizations. That's naturally the work of our sectoral ministries, but the same approach we're doing, that there has to be a strategy for each ministry. Each strategy has to have a certain program behind it, and in that program there should be a very clear understanding, the necessary investment, the reforms. And we, from our side, of course, we're talking about, first of all, about the infrastructure focus. Then next, we are coming back to a point that we would need to work on this program way, but at the same time to show it to maximum to our partners, to make sure we don't have any doubts that we understand what we're talking about. This is what we have prepared via Dream. This is exactly what we have at the moment. Just one moment. What we have at the moment is the first MVP. It's the first tool that we will be using and finalizing, but it has already given us the possibility to accumulate all the project ideas. That doesn't mean that this will be like a history, a story about that via Dream, it will be like a filter. No, at this moment, we are really making the policy of collecting as maximum as possible, adding the mechanism of prioritization, but nevertheless, the decision is always coming from the source of financing. We have the fund of liquidation of the consequences of the armed aggression of Russia. We also have a direction where we have the biggest number of funds together with the European Investment Bank. Slowly and slowly we are getting another program, so we need to have this overview. But at the same time, each of these programs, each of the donors have their own logic of prioritization. And we, as the government, we would not be able to reply the questions how Ukraine should prioritize without understanding what is happening in these separate projects. Our only decision is to have this digital solution. So now, if we're talking about the second question about the anti-corruption infrastructure, we have the same logic. We really understood that at our level, we have to provide the proper transparency, proper accountability, and only in such a way we can put inside the necessary indicators. Of course, the corruption risks exist not only at the procurement level, they are at the whole project infrastructure. So our Dream system, it will start to work fully from October. We are already using it for getting some reporting for the execution of objects, which are financed from the fund of liquidating the consequences of the armed aggression or the EIB. Nevertheless, we are fixing there all the stages of the infrastructure project, from the moment of prioritization to the moment in which way the tender selection has been done. Of course, it's done via Prozoro, but still it should be in one system. Then we also understand through the possibility of control through expanded Gov.ua, which expenditures are taking place, and also it's a mechanism for the civil society. When we have the proper implementation of the project on the ground, we have the possibility there to look whether the works are really being done. And it's important that information from the technical overview is fixed in our system. And it is, honestly, it's a very key component to prevent this corruption. Nobody would be able just to wink their eye, I will do this concrete tomorrow, but please write it in the report that I already have done it. So this is all very much fixed and recorded. So we will be dealing with these corruption problems at this level. And of course, it's a question to donors how they could prevent the overlapping so that one object would not be coming funds from Germany, from Great Britain. This will not be the case. So we are solving this via our digital solutions. Regarding the participation of international business, a little bit more complicated. It's a big work that we're doing together with the Ministry of Economy and in our team that also pertains to questions in which way it is possible to reform our procurement system to make more complicated forms of contracts, in which way we can also work the solutions where we will have the possibility, because the market should be open, but at the same time to still provide for our anti-corruption infrastructure. So the international business, of course, it has to be as much transparent as the Ukrainian system. That's why we started this way, starting from the Prozoro times. So this was like a key framework. And yes, I think we were able to reply to this. And for me, it was also important that with the work that we have done last year, we were asked why we should do recovery now. This year, nobody asked about it. Everybody's clear. It's part of our resistance. It's part of our support of the economy. It's taxes. It's also payment of our military. So it has worked really well together. But now about business. It's very much shortly. It was also the priority for us in London, and this is something that we want to aim our work in the future. We're working with the wide governmental team, but the recovery itself, the infrastructure initiatives without the understanding where we would have working places, where we have the business activity index, is also very much doubtful. That's why we're making this also our priority, this comprehensive recovery. But we are also trying to start to work for the multi-donor coordination platform, raising questions how it's possible that business would work less difficult, how we would support business, especially on the territories which were liberated. And of course, I understand that we have had several examples of countries who have started to do this. We are very much thankful to Germany because it gives certain guarantees, certain insurance to business who works in Ukraine. Denmark now allows projects that pertain recovery of regions, and they are talking that they are giving financing to business who is working in the region at very beneficial terms. So partially that's grant, 50%, 50% is a loan under 7% annual, but you will start repaying in 3 years. Oleksandra, I apologize because we have a lot of questions to you and we want to... I thought it was all the questions. I think I have already explained to you. Yes, a lot of interesting what is happening. So let's question by question. But you will not be able to stay until the end of the event. Yeah, hopefully I can return to discussion, but this, if I get a call, then I would have to go back. You know how it is to cancel the call from your manager.
Ну, да, це дуже погано. Давайте тоді ми будемо сподіватися, зараз ми перейдемо до Ольги, будемо дуже сподіватися, що ви повернетеся до дискусії, бо до вас є реально дуже багато
because there are a lot of questions to you, so hopefully we will see you in 10 minutes in Q&A session. And now let's proceed with the aspect of funding. And I would like to address this question to Olga Zykova, Deputy Minister of Finance of Ukraine. So what did the Minister of Finance bring back from London? What has been promised, which needs have not been covered, and where else do we need to do additional more work? Thank you, Maria, colleagues. I'm happy to join you here, and welcome to all participants online. Welcome to the audience. All in all, Hlib indicated that no full coverage was committed, and us as the Minister of Finance, we are realists and a little bit skeptical, so we didn't expect that. London was not the event that was supposed to resolve all the issues, and we wouldn't say that we have raised sufficient funding for the purpose of recovery for this year. But even with this degree of realism and a bit of skepticism, I would say that London conference has produced quite positive results. Despite the fact that the main focus was on recovery and reconstruction, we need to keep in mind that the basis for recovery and the precondition to involve the respective funding is preservation of macro financial stability. And this is something that we need to keep in mind because work is ongoing. There are negotiations with key stakeholders, partners, so that coverage of the deficit as of the end of the year did happen in the amount as planned, both in the framework of IMF program and in the context of bilateral negotiations and agreements with partner countries. The more we are sure of preserving microfinancial stability and covering budget deficit, the more we will be able to focus on recovery, reconstruction, and implementation of the respective projects. Currently, the macrofinancial situation is such that out of the general need, $42.5 billion, the state budget has already received about $23.6 billion, and the main key donors are the EU. 9 billion euros have been received to the budget, the US They've provided $7.2 billion, and IMF, the respective tranches have been received for the amount of 3.6 billion. Why that's important? That's important because we see the significant difference from the previous year. These tranches arrive in a rhythmical, predictive way, and we have more room to refocus on the topic of recovery. Another important aspect is that we need to keep in mind that these revenues and these funds are not unconditional. We have certain commitments in the framework of IMF program and also our commitments in the framework of macrofin. Plus, we complied with the prerequisites to receive the tranche from the government of Japan, 1.5 billion, and the DPL, which is structured as a DPL with the World Bank. So it means that when we comply with those requirements, we implement the reforms. And thus a country at war, but that still continues implementing the reforms, has even more trust among donors. And we see that having this basis for implementation of the conditions and receiving money for direct budget support, that's the basis to receive funds for the purposes of recovery. In the framework of the conference, one of cornerstones, and that's a positive change versus last year, that is change of mindset of some specific governments and international financial organizations. They changed the attitude to the war and to Ukraine in the state of the war. I'm not speaking about support now. I mean, support is there, and I hope that these intentions will stay high. I'm speaking rather about the assessment of capacities of the government and of the steps undertaken by the government in the situation of the war. Thinking has changed, mindset has changed regarding provision of the support, because last year we spoke about 1 month or 1 quarter ahead prospects. Currently, as proven by the conference and the commitments that we heard, the countries and IFIs are open to midterm and long-term planning of Ukraine support, and that's so important. This positive change gives us more area for planning, for developments of the reform and recovery plan. And of course, above all, this is about IMF program for 4 years with clear statements of the guarantees by the donors. But midterm planning also includes commitments from the UK. We heard it from the political leadership of the country that the UK intends in the next 3 years to provide Ukraine with guarantees in the amount of $3 billion of additional funding in the form of additional funding from the World Bank. Then the Norwegian 5-year package. Norway was one of the first countries that came up with this initiative of midterm planning of assistance for Ukraine in 3 areas: budget support, military support, and humanitarian support. The World Bank, that is now with us, and teams of line ministries, they are developing framework agreements that would cover several years, and they would cover budget needs and also needs in the context of recovery. So partners are already thinking in categories of long-term and mid-term prospects, in contrast to the last year. And the key financial commitment of London was the Ukraine facility from the EU, as Hlib mentioned, 50 billion for 4 years, which includes several components. The first one is financial support, support of reforms, budget support, and reconstruction reform. The second pillar is the investment framework. It will be intended to involve private and public investments in recovery and rebuilding of Ukraine. And the third pillar is about technical assistance, including expert assistance. That's important because we need to develop and expand our capacity to come up with the projects and to implement them. What's important is that in the framework of Ukraine facility from the European Union, the key component will be the government's development of the recovery plan. And this plan is going to be an extensive strategic document which will set the direction for development of the state for the next years. And one needs to be very serious about it. And actually, it is a comprehensive frame both for reforms and for investments. And of course, there will be a list of conditions that Ukraine will need to comply with, and the respective schedule of payment of the tranches. The negotiations are still ongoing. Credit or grant-based funding, but also there will be this element of audit and control. And the Ukrainian party insisted on the intention that in the framework of recovery, we need to stick with the same principles that we complied with when we involved funding directly for budget support. This is about transparency and mechanisms to control use of funds. And the transparency from the European Union will include a mechanism for audit and control that will make it possible at any phase of the project cycle to report to ensure accountability for the money used. Olga, and I believe that you have 1 more minute to complete. Okay, very briefly about plans for 2024, as mentioned by Hlib. So we are negotiating with Norway and Japan, and we know that as of 2024, about 2 billion hryvnias will be allocated from the Japanese package, 5.5 billion. Norway, in their multi-year package, they included $7.5 billion for direct budgetary support. And here it's possible to speak about the year 2024, especially Q1, and the IMF framework helps us to remind the platforms that they already came up with their commitments so that the 4-year IMF program were covered and financed. So the work for 2024 has already started, because we need to keep in mind that in midterm planning, we are working not only on recovery, but above all on the budget. Because as I mentioned, we need to preserve macro financial stability. And frankly speaking, this midterm prospect, well, it needs well, there we have the same obligations within the agreements with the IMF. We need to go back to development of midterm budgets and development of the respective strategy, midterm strategy. And we are on the same page with donors in that respect. And we are working in 2 key directions: direct budgetary support and recovery projects. Thank you, Olga. And now we have 20 minutes on air, and I ask Robert Kirchner to tell us about what interesting things he heard in London and what he expects from Ukraine for Ukraine in Berlin, because I believe that you will participate in the Berlin conference as well, and you have some expectations there. And then I hope that Oleksandra, Azarkhina, and Olga will be able to stay with us, and we will come up with a Q&A session, because there are a lot of questions from the audience to you. And now,
Robert, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Maria. Good afternoon from my side, and also thank you for inviting me and for sharing some maybe personal takeaways from the London conference that took place at the end of June.
And given the time constraint, I would probably limit myself to four observations. The first, I'm pretty much agree with Olga and the others that the event itself, I would say, was a success, because we are 17 months into this horrible war, and still Ukraine managed in London to give really a good performance. And there were more than 1,000 stakeholders invited, from international policymakers, domestic policymakers, businessmen, NGOs. Not just during the conference, there were many, many side events where also the same kind of people or other people discussed. So to have to stage such an event in London is, in my view, a great thing. It's a success, and it shows also the hard work that Ukrainian authorities put into this. Yeah, I think this is also well deserved for this. That's my first point. The second point, I think the strong message that the international community sent in supporting, in continuation of supporting Ukraine, and here especially what also was sent, the EU proposal, the Commission proposal on this Ukraine facility, this I would say is probably, or was a highlight of the event in my view, because around this, other donors were already adding on that, and this medium-term financial support is, apart from the sum, we can discuss whether it covers everything, obviously not, but still, it covers a lot of the expected financial gaps for the next years. It is, due to this medium-term character, also a very strong signal, because it is predictability, right? It is predictability for the donors, for the EU and the others. It is predictable also for Ukrainians, which fight this war. And we remember last year when international support started to come in, it came a very volatile way. And we always remember, together with the colleagues from the CES, we wrote that we need more predictability into this, right? So that Ukraine's Ministry of Finance and so on can also make a better job in counting on these monies and use it. And I would also say it is a strong message to Moscow that the Ukraine support will be whatever it takes on the EU's Western agenda in the medium term. I think this is something that should not be overlooked as well here. The third observation was, and here again, that was already mentioned before, many of the announcements that frozen Russian assets will be used to rebuild Ukraine. And I think there is now a kind of consensus that this has to be the case. At the same time, we have to observe that there is a certain lag between this consensus, which is mentioned, and what is actually happening on the ground. So far, unfortunately, not much has been really already seized and transferred to Ukraine, basically nothing. So there are still discussions ongoing. And here I see a bit of a disconnect. I hope that practical work will close this gap. I think work is going on, but probably we will not see these huge sums anytime soon transferred to Ukraine. So now, again, the latest discussions are on looking at the proceeds from these assets and to use them in any way to transfer Ukraine, which is good, but obviously it's not that hundreds of billions of dollars will come anytime soon, right? I think we have to be realistic on that. And the last point, business. And this is a bit strange because actually the conference was focused on business support or business engagement in the recovery process. And here, and this is maybe also a kind of observation and recommendation to the Ukrainian side, I think there are different types of business activities. And where I found a lot of interest was business interest in the engagement in the recovery process. So when we're talking about rebuilding, reconstruction, a lot of infrastructure construction companies, engineering companies, and so on are very much interested in this, right? And that means, obviously, you need funding for this, because they always ask first, where's the budget? And here, this medium-term public support that I mentioned before, I think is important because it can at least address a certain part of it. Obviously, not everything that is necessary, by far not, but it is a start. And with this money, business can start to plan. But beyond the funding, obviously, questions are tender procedures that have been mentioned. How do the responsibilities look like? Who's the contact point from the Ukrainian side? How is the institutional setup of the recovery process? So all these questions automatically come in this kind of business activities. And here it's good that Ukraine is making progress. More progress is needed to cater to these needs. And I would say a lot of companies that were present at the conference were exactly looking into this niche. Where we had, or that was my impression, where we had less visibility was in concrete FDI projects and concrete investment into, factories, creating jobs and so on. And this is probably not a surprise given that the war is ongoing. Yes, there were discussions and some progress on war-related insurance. Yeah, we have seen more of these pilots. And equally, I think also the discussion evolved around the rule of law, transparency, anti-corruption agenda. This was something where personally I observed more and more questions come also from companies that are at least interested into this, because obviously both things are very important for them. And here, I think it was good that Ukraine engaged into this discussion, pointed to many, many ongoing reforms, also success of reforms. That was very, I think, also appreciated from the business side. Obviously, this needs to be sped up and continued. I would also mention that the NBU's plans or actually decisions to relax capital controls was also very much appreciated. I think nobody from the NBU was there, but the decisions to relax capital controls was appreciated, because obviously when you ask investors to bring in the money and invest, you need also allow them in the long term to take out the proceeds. So this was something which was appreciated. And also, I think what was important was the plans by different institutions to scale up war risk insurance. Yes, the EBRD plan was mentioned. Still, I think this is in a pilot phase, and that needs to be first worked out and then scaled up. But still, it is, I think, an important development here. The last point that I would like to make is something that was, in my view, missing. And the missing part, in my view, is the link between security guarantees for Ukraine as a country, which is very much discussed currently in the run-up to the NATO summit in Vilnius, and the implications for kind of business security or the business sector. Because this is something which are two parallel streams of discussion, which in my view should be somehow reunited or united, because obviously a security for the whole, or a credible security guarantee for the whole country, which have huge positive implications for business security. And so we would not really need to discuss a lot on public or military public risk insurance or war risk insurance when actually there is a credible security commitment to the country. And that is something that during the conference I didn't really observe a lot. Some people talk about that. And in the West, I think some people realize also that this might be the first best option actually, because by such a credible guarantee, you could really contribute a lot to the recovery and reconstruction process involving private business, because then their security situation would be much, much better. Yeah, this is something I think which should be followed in the future and maybe also elaborated a bit more. So far, this is my four key takeaways from the conference, but I'm happy to ask any or to answer questions on that. Thank you.
Robert, thanks a lot. Дякую дуже, Robert.
Such good expectations. I would like to ask Oleksandra Azarkhina if she is with us. Would she be able to join us now, Ms. Oleksandra? She is here, but so far as I understand, she can't reply. Maybe we'll ask in chat. Then we have a question to Olga Zykova about the expectations of the Ministry of Finances. Olga, how do you see, from your point of view, from the Ministry of Finances, from the budget finances, how the ministry sees how you can cover the big costs of recovery and how you could possibly use the Russian assets? Has Minfin thought about it? What would be your attitude towards that? Naturally, we have to understand that even this year's need of $14.1 billion for recovery is just too much. I'm not talking even about the overall assessment in the even midterm recovery of Ukraine. So to do away without using the frozen assets, especially the revenues from the frozen assets, and this is something that is very much being actively discussed with our European partners by our Ministry of Justice, the team who is working actually on that issue. from the side of the Ukrainian government. This is definitely one of the components, and it should be one of the components for the recovery, same as we formed the Fund of Liquidation, the consequences of the Russian aggression within the framework of the budget, which is actually one of the internal sources which we want to direct to the needs of recovery. Among the sources of the liquidation fund, we have it's actually forceful collection of documents of the assets of Russia. And it's probably, I heard for the first time during the London conference, very publicly, the topic that this Ukraine facility US would also include, among other sources, the confiscated assets. So the European Union, the United States understand that it will be necessary to change the internal bureaucracies to make sure we would find legal basis, grounds for usage, for redirection, especially at least revenues from the frozen assets. So the Ministry of Finances and the government in general are actively working on that issue, and this was actually one of the key questions within the framework of the conference, both at the high political level as well as the expert panels. The concept and the mechanisms of confiscation and usage of revenues from the frozen assets of Russia. Thank you, Olga. One more question from the chat to Robert. Shall I read it in English? I will try to translate it. How important it is for Germany would be the criteria of due diligence.
Я прочитаю англійською, вибачте. How important for Germany will be the criteria of due diligence, sustainability, responsibility, and compliance? How and when do you plan to explain the German Supply Chain Act and promote or enforce it with Ukrainian companies? Honestly, I have no idea what is the question about, but I guess Robert can have
I'll try to. So basically, I mean, we have in German it is this law on supply chain compliance. I'm not an expert on that, but we have a very active chamber on a business chamber, a German-Ukrainian business chamber, which is already active in Kiev, also with its CEO. And they are basically the ones that can address these questions because they are dealing with bilateral German-Ukrainian trade relations. So I would actually refer this question to them. I can share the contacts, or you know them already, that these specific questions can be asked to them because they are representing German business and they know best on these questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Robert. One last request, whether Oleksandra is with us, if she is ready to answer the questions that we have for her. No? Unfortunately, we may have lost her. Okay. From my side, what I would like to promise that all of your questions are already copied, and we would like to ask Oleksandra with answers to the questions that were addressed to her. Or maybe we can try, I will make a video, I will make a letter, I'm ready to work. Let's have at least one question because a lot of people are here, they're very much interested how it is going to have the interaction with the communities. It will also about the cooperation with communities, the development of the city documentation, whether it will all be incorporated in all of your work. If you can reply to this, and the rest we will try to record a video. Okay, conditionally, we have a basic understanding among the recovery projects for the agency of recovery that will be 20%. The rest will be at the level of those who are the balance keepers, the regions, the communities. This could be often state and not state assets, which will become a part of the big restoration. So the role of the agency is to drive the national flagship programs. We already see how the portfolio of the agency is actually coming out. So the agency takes care of some complicated, urgent things, like, for instance, the supply of the water, transportation systems, or energy infrastructure, where it is very much urgent. Such things where the communities would be simply difficult to do it themselves, because in their self-governance, of course, they can act only as the one who are ordering this. So we are taking care of really of flagship national projects that really present the interests of the state. But recovery is the process that takes into account a lot of stakeholders, a lot of levels. So the role of the Ministry of Recovery to give this coordination and to give the possibilities that all stakeholders would understand and would understand how they should correlate. I hope that we will still solve a lot of issues through our digital system, but if we're talking about interaction with the level of communities and the level of regions, then we're very much interested that the private business would make the possibility of some direct relationship, would build directly the business partnership. And we have to understand that 1 year ago, there was the legislation adopted that helps, and the loans for the municipalities. All of these things, together with the financial centralization that we have at the moment, this should be absolutely clear partnership at the level of communities. Our policy as the state is exactly to make sure it's all in the framework of one strategic vision and our possibility to be assessed. So it really is done a lot at the level of communities. That's like a big reply. Once again, we have had reform of the state governments. We have the level of forming the policy, and there is the level of implementation. We are talking about prioritization, the oral vision, the reforms related to recovery. But what concerns exactly execution is the agency, and it should be a big, reliable partner, but exactly in this aspect. Thank you. Maybe you can have you for one more question. The director has asked to ask you. I have seen how you were working in London. That looked like a rock band tour that was performing every evening at the stadiums. But coming back to the topic of London, what is your vision? What is your feeling? How all this logic of our process of recovery, how was it accepted by our partners? Was it enough for them to make sure they can say, we understand it, it's all under control, or we have to do something else? What is your perception for that? Regarding DREAM, there was a lot of skepticism. Even if we say, go up the page, you will see the projects loaded from communities, they will be competing, they will change a lot of this about decision-making. So my dream is actually to, when I will be during this state service, it should be data-driven solutions. And I see a chance here, but still the skepticism is here. Okay, we say we will work on that. We have a great team in the industry, in the agency, and we also launched the office of DREAM. So this will be exactly dedicated people who will be doing this, and exactly it is coming that this product is becoming, how to correctly say, it is from all different elements, and it's starting to accumulate, to unite, and I already see the result. Of course, I understand that the skepticism will still be there. We will overcome it within 2 months, so we will be sending them not the tables anymore, so that what was promised, what was given, but then when they will see it in some normal dashboards in the system, they will take a better look at it, better opinion about that. And we're working in that direction. It's a normal situation. The ambition that we have put inside this digital system, of course, it's huge. And naturally, we will have to live up to that, and we will need the support of many stakeholders. But nobody has thought of anything better in order, other than to put it together in one system and to prevent all the corruption risks, and really to have it in one system. Because again, I will repeat, we don't have any holistic plan, that we have only one fund, and then everything is going to the implementation of this only plan. This is not done like that, and it's all done in running. These are the realities of our management, and that it's not always bad. That's first part. The second part, if we talk about the architecture of the recovery from the personal, let me share with you once again that I already have dealt with the situation from what I have said and what I've shown, some data-driven solutions, some program documents. That doesn't mean that people are convinced and already believe it. So there is still a lot to work with, some fine details. And for instance, the Euro Commission, they have heard us. They're very happy that we're making such an approach, which is data-based and on program-based. But at the very same time, in those documents that they have also shared with us, on which we continue to working, the vehicle of Ukrainian reconstruction, that's where they ask very much directly, please explain to us clearly what vision you have, what planning you have. And I fully understand that. That's, of course, the work that still has to be finished by our team. That's why, surprisingly as it may seem, the root is communication. And communication both inside the government and at the level of various bodies of authorities and with the partners. But in any case, we're on the right track.
We're on the right way.
This was a very nice completion of your statement. We also have the last item of our program is, unfortunately, we couldn't have online, but he has sent his video. Thomas, the Vice President and the Executive Director of the Berlin office of the German Marshall Fund, he has also shared his experience on the results of the conference. So colleagues, let us turn this video on and let's hear it.
Greetings, Kiev. Greetings from Berlin. I am so sorry I can't be with you today, but thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words through this video. I was asked to answer a question, and I will read the question to you. We did not see a lot of commitment to finance large-scale recovery at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in London, pretty much the same as in Lugano. How can you explain that? What could Ukraine do to change that? Well, I'm a bit surprised, I have to be honest, about the question, because I do not share the premise of the question, because it seems to say that between Lugano and today, little progress has been made, at least not enough progress to get to something concrete. Well, let me review what I think the progress that has been made since Lugano looks like. Lugano was a set of principles of how to think about reconstruction and the Western support to reconstruction. Well, since then, we've established the rapid damage assessment mechanism, a donor coordination platform, multiple financing elements, Ukrainian ministry and an implementation agency for reconstruction, several accountability and transparency tools, including the DREAM system, the invitation to become an EU member, a security arrangement and structure for Ukraine as part of the Western community is ongoing. And in London, we've seen progress towards war insurance and a 50 billion euro plan through 2027 by the European Union, set on top of an already existing IMF program. So I think what we're seeing is the emergence of an architecture of reconstruction with institutions and instruments and getting successively more concrete. And London was, in my view, an impressive and in some ways a successful conference, because it marked the transition from the ad hoc to the structured, from the charity to the integration into Western systems. And the multi-year nature of many of the things that have been announced in London, I think was the most important element to me, and that is of course anchored by the EU commitment that for the first time tries to combine and link EU accession requirements with reconstruction. So I do think huge progress has been made, and in some ways you could even say the London conference was an accidental pledging conference. It was not even supposed to be one, but all of a sudden there were 60 billion in pledges, and if Ukraine does what the EU plan requires, let's say through the end of the year, which is to present a plan how to actually spend and meet the requirements of those pledges, then there is a good amount of money to be spent on even early repair and reconstruction starting next year. And this year, the financing gap that existed before London is from the 14 billion that the Ukrainian government announced to be necessary, has been dramatically closed. So, going back to your question, I see the opposite happening. I see a massive structural change, an architectural change towards a flow of things that is concrete and dependable, that it gives Ukraine a planning basis and tells Vladimir Putin at the same time that it may be a bad bet to want to wait out the West. Now, your question, why is so little happening, could be one of an expectation game. That, of course, within Ukraine, the expectations are higher than what the Western countries can and will be able to do in the same time frame, and I think that is probably a fair assessment. But the expectation also, that expectation game caught up with me about a year ago when I started with this work, and that was the expectation of the Ukrainians that reconstruction start now. And many in the West said, no, we'll have to have the war end. And I think there has been progress on the Western side, but I have to say a little acknowledgement of the limits of things in the financial markets on the Ukrainian side. Progress on the Western side is, I think, the idea that there ought to be early recovery and early repairs to keep the lights on, to keep things moving in Ukraine, to not allow Vladimir Putin to create the failed state that he wishes to create, to allow an economy to function in Ukraine, and to allow tax income to be generated to finance all of these things, so that even if, let's say, a bridge was to be repaired twice, it would make sense, and even if that is based on Western taxpayers' money. I think so. The consensus has been built around that. But what I did observe in London is something different. The financial community in the city of London, the big funds, the big money people, they are simply not willing to invest in Ukraine, even with war insurance. Some aren't. Only those who either have an investment already or have some philosophical, ideological, patriotic, whatever reason to invest in Ukraine now. So I think what we're seeing is a hesitancy of the capital markets until and unless there is predictability and there's peace. And there's very little that can be done for hard-nosed people who count pennies and count dollars and count euros for that to change. So that we're looking at a public sector-led repair and reconstruction drive that is picking up steam, and an investment drive that is waiting for predictability and for investment to come, and is hesitant until that very moment. So I guess that's my assessment of where we stand after London. And again, sorry I can't be with you. Have a good conference. Thank you.
Ну, я теж дякую від себе всім
I'm also grateful to all participants of today's panel, to everyone who presented and prepared the review of the Ukrainian economy, everybody who connected, and sorry for this kind of disco background. Unfortunately, it may happen, and I invite everyone who is here with us to pay attention to Hlib Foundation and to donate for tactical medicine. This is what saves lives and what helps Ukraine to progress, to move forward. And looking forward to seeing you at the next
Центр економічної стратегії та German Economic Team.